Hello, my name is Erin Cross, and I am an assistant professor of art at Doane University in Crete, Nebraska. I want to welcome you to this video series exploring various artwork in the permanent collection here at Doane. Today I want to talk to you about the Regionalist Triumvirate and their interaction with the American Artists Association, or AAA, during the Great Depression and World War II. Now, regionalism was an extremely broad art movement during the early 20th century that most often refers to a concentrated group of Midwestern artists who rejected the European influence of abstraction for a more relatable and realistic style. Regionalists championed the agrarian landscape and small-town life in America. Because the regionalist time frame was within the 1930s, these artists are often linked to the Great Depression due to the often contrasting but optimistic and heroic compositions depicting beauty, triumph, and piety within the struggling communities. Purely an American movement, it championed the spirit and folklore of the American voice and did not have an organized manifesto, but coalesced organically through the often narrative and insightful compositions of the three men known as the Regionalist Triumvirate. You have Grant Wood, Thomas Hart Benton, and John Steuart Curry. Now, these weren't the only artistic voices of regionalism, but their strong sense of nationalism, rejected modern styles, helped dominate themselves as leaders in the movement. Two of the prints we will look at were made during World War II, with one being used for the war effort. Now, it is the same attitude and artistic conviction, however, that forced regionalism out of favor by the end of World War II. Now, because the buying of art was too much of a luxury during the Great Depression, art dealers created the American Artists Association, AAA, and contracted artists to produce affordable art through the technique of printmaking. These prints were sold in magazines as mail order and department stores for $5 or $7 a print, and the editions were large at 250, and the artist signed each one. Printmaking is a form of art-making technique that allows an artist's work to be more accessible to the general public by allowing the artist to produce many copies from one image. Now, I have introduced y'all to Elizabeth Bishop in an earlier video, and she produced etchings, so go ahead and check out that short chat about her work. I'll put a link in the description box. Okay, so the form of printing by the Regionalist Triumvirate that I will be talking about today are lithographs. Now, lithography is one form of printmaking, and the artist uses a grease pencil and draws on a prepared limestone. The stone is chemically treated, and the oily ink resists the wax when paper and stone go through the press, resulting in an image transferring from the stone to paper. So here is an example of an advertisement for these prints put out by the AAA, and $5 today would be about $90, so still rather expensive, but at the same time very affordable. And you could send off for this catalog and choose which prints you actually wanted. Okay, so let me introduce to you our artists. We're going to be looking at Grant Wood, John Steuart Curry, and Thomas Hart Benton. Grant Wood was born in 1891 in Anamosa, Iowa, and died in 1941 in Iowa City, Iowa. He's best known for his painting American Gothic. Grant Wood created highly complex and idealized images of Midwestern landscapes and its people, At first glance, his images tend to lean towards a sense of nostalgia or sentimental romanticism, but there is also a strong sense of dark humor and harmonious isolation, expertly and gently composed throughout his work. So today we're going to look at Grant Wood's Shrine Quartet. It was published in 1939, a lithograph on paper. It's an approximately 12 inches by 16 inches, and it was printed in an edition of 250. I love the deep shadows in this lithograph. The light source is clear and stark and shining. It's shining so brightly on these singing men, and I think we need to understand our subject before we go any further. So who are the Shriners? Now, the Shriners are an offshoot of Freemasonry, and Shriners are more about fun and socializing and volunteering as opposed to the more serious and intellectually symbol-driven Freemason. And from what I understand, all Shriners are Freemasons, but not all Freemasons are Shriners. So with that in mind, this image takes on more of a feeling of fun and maybe some silly nostalgia. The background is a generically inspired Egyptian backdrop, which would have paralleled the fraternity's name and the unique mythos. When you really focus on the singers' faces, there is such a sincerity and a devotion to that moment. If anything, Grant was making a statement about the duality that community can make. On one hand, we need to feel a sense of belonging. We need to have those relationships that lift us up. It's humorous fantasies while keeping us grounded in some positive realities. But when community takes on this all-consuming approach of zealous behavior, that we find a distortion and cartoonish example of what it means to be human. And we see that bloated passion in this frozen moment, with men singing loudly, their mouths gaped wide open, too wide, their ears folding under the weight of costume hats, with large shadows overpowering the backdrop scenery. Now, I have read some commentary on this print that is rather brutal and negative, and although I could reason and agree with some of it, I don't truly believe Wood was poking fun at the Shriners in a malicious way. Sure, there is satire present, but Wood was a participating member of the Masons for 3 years, and the men in the print have been identified as his friends and were friendly acquaintances. So I don't see his vision for this as mean-spirited, just some old-fashioned fraternal teasing. So John Steuart Curry, he was born in 1887 in Doane, Kansas, and died in 1946 in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, charged with a dynamic energy and earnestly driven pathos, John Steuart Curry's narratives radiate an expressive authority. He boldly beckons the viewer to ask questions that teeter a fine line between spiritual and sinister. Curry's often awkward accuracy of rendering causes issues with the critics of his day, but his poignant visual stories have remained steadfastly relevant. So we're going to take a look at John Steuart Curry's Our Good Earth. It was published in 1942. It's a lithograph on paper. It's approximately 10.5 inches by 12.75 inches, and it was printed in an edition of 250. Okay, So let's look at John Steuart Curry's Our Good Earth. Now, this image was originally for a war bond poster during World War II. And the composition depicts an American farmer with his children in a Kansas wheat field. And it suggests how important farming was to the war effort. How so? Well, just look at the great expanse of the wheat field dramatically flowing in the wind. The farmhouse is small and in the distance, and this use of spatial distancing allows the viewer to see the amount of space dedicated to the wheat fields, an American food source. And the farmer is in the foreground, wading through the wheat. This presence purposely creates a monument for the farmer's importance. And just think about purchasing this print and hanging it in your own farmhouse during that time. It was an image of hope, hope for the heartland, hope for the hardworking farmer, and hope for the future farmers of America. Okay, our third artist is Thomas Hart Benton. He was born in 1889 in Neosho, Missouri, and died in 1975 in Kansas City, Missouri. Incredibly emotive through his use of exaggerated, curved forms and mark making, Thomas Hart Benton's compositions contain a sense of musical quality, showcasing his interest in visual sound within his narrative and rolling landscapes. Bold and outspoken, Benton's work was often overshadowed by his strong ego that would eventually isolate him from the art world and artists within his own style. So we're going to look at Thomas Hart Benton's Loading Corn. It was published in 1945. It's a lithograph on paper, and its edition was 250. And the image is 10 inches by 14 inches. Okay, and now we have Thomas Hart Benton's Loading Corn. Now, in 1920s, Benton was producing rather abstract and modern work, but it was a visit back home to see his sick father that ignited a new focus on the Midwestern landscape. As a champion of the working class people, Benton focused on the field worker, the farmer, and middle American life. Even with the mundane repetition of working the fields, Benton creates a spiritualized energy similar to the frenzied mark making of Spanish artist El Greco, as the act of loading corn becomes a pious practice for the ritual of harvesting. I love how the corn stalks stand as monuments, reminders of the past season's bounty. I hope you have enjoyed learning more about the regionalist artists Grant Wood, John Steuart Curry, and Thomas Hart Benton. And I hope you will join me again for another chat about art from the permanent collection here at Doane University. Until next time.